My name is Maya. At the time of this story, I was 27 years old, working at a mid-sized marketing consultancy in the city. Respectable company, 40-something employees, open plan office, the whole thing. The kind of place where they put motivational quotes on the kitchen walls and call it company culture. I had been there for about 2.5 years, starting as a junior content strategist and working my way up to a slightly less junior content strategist. Which is to say, I was doing more work for roughly the same money, but with a fancier title on my email signature.
Classic.
My direct manager was a man I'm going to call Daniel, because that is, in fact, his name, and I feel like changing it would be doing a disservice to the absurdity of everything that followed.
Daniel was 35.
He was the head of content strategy, my boss's boss, technically, though he'd recently been promoted himself into a newly restructured role that put him directly over our entire team. He was intelligent. He was well-dressed. He had the kind of calm, measured way of speaking that made everything he said sound reasonable, even when it wasn't. He was also, and I want to be very clear about this, not my type. At least not at first. I want to say that because I think it matters for the story. This wasn't a situation where I walked into a job, clocked my attractive boss, and decided to make things complicated. That's not what happened. What happened was slower and stranger and, honestly, a lot more interesting than that. The company had just gone through a structural reshuffle. 3 teams had been merged into one. Our new combined unit, content, creative, and digital, was now reporting to Daniel. That meant I suddenly had a lot more access to him. Team meetings, one-on-ones, project reviews. I went from seeing him maybe once a month to seeing him 3 times a week, and I still didn't think much of it. He was my boss. A good boss, actually. He gave clear feedback. He advocated for the team in budget meetings. He remembered your coffee order if he was making a round. I wasn't looking for anything. I was just trying to pay my rent. But then the company adopted a new internal communications platform. And that's where the whole thing started to quietly, invisibly, completely fall apart. The platform was called Hive. It was basically Slack, but slightly worse and significantly more expensive, which is very on-brand for corporate tech procurement. Everyone got an account. It had group channels, direct messages, status updates, the usual. Within the first week, most of us were using it for its intended purpose, sharing files, pinging questions, sending the occasional GIF into the general channel to commemorate someone's birthday. Daniel used it for work too, at first. He'd send the team updates, post project briefs, forward links to industry articles. But then, somewhere around week 3, he sent me a direct message that wasn't strictly work-related. It was a link to a New Yorker piece about the commodification of creativity in the digital marketing space. And underneath the link, he'd written, "Saw this and thought of your comment in Tuesday's meeting.
You were right, by the way."
Now, on paper, that is a completely professional message. There is nothing remotely inappropriate about it. A manager sends a subordinate an article. He acknowledges that her point in a meeting was correct. That's mentorship. That's good management, arguably. Except nobody had ever sent me an article just because it reminded them of something I said. In 2.5 years at that company, not once had anyone followed up on a meeting comment with unsolicited intellectual validation. So I responded. I said something like, thanks for sending this. It actually connects to something else I've been thinking about regarding the Q4 strategy. And he wrote back. And I wrote back. And we went back and forth for about 45 minutes, discussing content theory and creative commodification and the ethics of ghostwriting influencer campaigns. It was, honestly, genuinely, one of the best conversations I'd had at work in years. That was a Tuesday evening at 9:15 p.m., which, in retrospect, was probably the first sign that the line between professional and something else was already starting to smudge. Over the next few weeks, the messages became a ritual. During the day, everything was normal. Team stand-ups, project reviews, performance check-ins, all completely above board.
Daniel was my boss.
I was his employee. Professional, appropriate, unremarkable. But in the evenings, starting around 8 or 9, the Hive DMs would begin. A question,
An observation, an article link,
a joke about something that had happened in a meeting earlier, a complaint about a client we both found exhausting, and then longer things.
more personal things.
He mentioned going through a difficult period in his marriage. I mentioned that I'd been feeling stuck in my career, like I was moving through sand. He told me about a project he'd been quietly building on the side, a newsletter, actually, about design ethics. I told him I'd always wanted to write something that wasn't for a client. We were not, to be absolutely clear, exchanging anything explicit. There were no declarations. No, I like you, or I think about you, or anything of that nature. It was softer softer than that and more dangerous than that in a way, because it had the plausible deniability of friendship. But it was not friendship. I knew it was not friendship the evening he sent me a message that said, "I think you're the only person in this company who actually says what they mean." And I stared at that sentence for about 5 minutes before I typed anything back. Because it wasn't what he said. It was how it felt to read it. It felt like being seen. And when you've been working somewhere for 2.5 years and feeling largely invisible, being seen is an extraordinarily powerful thing, even if the person seeing you is your boss, and even if that is a problem. Especially then, actually.
Now I want to be honest with you.
I have had a lot of time since all of this to think about what the affair actually was.
Because we never met outside the office. We never touched.
We never said the words, "This is what this is." What we had was an emotional affair, conducted entirely through a workplace messaging platform, which means it was simultaneously very intimate and completely impossible to deny if someone had simply scrolled through the DM history. It was the most nakedly documented secret I have ever kept. It started about 3 months into our whatever it was, when HR began a routine engagement survey. Every year, the company sent out an anonymous pulse survey, one of those things where you rate your manager, your team culture, your sense of psychological safety at work on a scale of 1 to 5. Meant to be anonymous. Everyone knew it wasn't entirely anonymous, because the teams were small enough that patterns were obvious. But in theory, anonymous. I filled mine out honestly. I gave Daniel a 4 out of 5, which was actually quite good. I said my relationship with my direct line manager was positive. I mentioned I felt ready for more senior responsibilities. What I did not say, obviously, was that my direct line manager and I were exchanging deeply personal messages on a work platform at 10 p.m. on weeknights.
It is where the story gets complicated.
About 2 weeks after the survey, Daniel requested a one-to-one with me, which was not unusual. We had them every fortnight. But this one felt different from the moment I walked into the room. He was tense. Not visibly, not in a way anyone else would have clocked. But I knew him well enough by then to read the difference between composed Daniel and composed but stressed Daniel. And this was the latter. He told me that HR had flagged something in the survey analysis. Not my survey specifically, but a pattern in the team. There had been several comments from various team members describing what the HR summary called an uneven interpersonal dynamic in the department. I didn't say anything. Daniel continued. He said that HR had scheduled a follow-up discussion with him to unpack the survey results, and that part of that discussion would include examining his management relationships across the team, specifically whether any relationships appeared to receive preferential treatment in terms of communication, project allocation, or professional development. He said, "I want you to know that I'm going to handle this. But I also want to be honest with you that our communication over the last few months, the Hive messages, all of it, if anyone pulled those logs, it would look." He trailed off. I finished the sentence. "Like a problem." He nodded. What happened next is the part that still makes my stomach drop when I think about it. Because what I expected him to say was something like, "I think we need to pull back, keep things strictly professional, and I'm sorry if I put you in an uncomfortable position." That is what a person with good judgment and a functioning moral compass would have said. What Daniel actually said was, "There's a senior strategist role opening. The formal announcement goes out next month. I want to put your name forward." Let me break down what he was actually saying to me in that moment. He was saying, "The HR department is about to start looking at my management relationships. You and I have a paper trail of very personal messages on a company platform. If I promote you to a different reporting line, those messages become less immediately suspicious because you're no longer my direct report. Additionally, it gives both of us a professional reason for having had a close working relationship. You were a high potential employee I invested in. The promotion is the proof." He was using my career as a paper shredder. And the absolutely infuriating, humiliating, complicated thing, the job was real. It was a genuine promotion. The role was actually a great fit for me. The salary bump was 22%, and I was angry at him and embarrassed and deeply uncomfortable, and I still had to sit there and consider it seriously because I needed that money, and because I was good at the work, and because turning it down meant explaining why without incriminating myself in the process. That is the trap. That is the specific, uniquely awful trap of this situation. He hadn't done me a favor. He had created a scenario where I could not afford to say no. I took the promotion. I know. But just stay with me here, because the story gets a lot messier before it gets better. The formal announcement went out on a Thursday morning. My name, my new title, my new reporting line, all there in an all-staff email from the CEO. Congratulations, promotion, exciting new chapter, blah blah blah. The reactions were mostly positive. My teammates were warm. People I barely spoke to swung by my desk to offer handshakes. Someone put a balloon on my monitor, which I found both touching and mortifying. But I noticed something. A few people, 2 or 3 of the longer tenured employees, had a look when they read that email. A small, careful, measuring look. The kind of look that says, "That's interesting timing." And it was interesting timing. Everyone with eyes could see that the promotion had come in the window between the HR survey and the follow-up meeting. They might not have known why, but they noticed that. The weeks that followed were some of the most psychologically exhausting of my life. And I want to explain why, because I don't think people fully understand what it feels like to carry a secret in a workplace. It's not just that you're nervous someone will find out. It's that you start to lose track of what is real and what is the story you're performing. I was pretending that I was simply a hardworking employee who had earned a well-deserved promotion. And that was partly true. I was good at my job. I had earned recognition. But the timing, the context, the reason the decision had been accelerated, all of that was wrapped around something I couldn't say out loud. So I became very, very careful. I stopped using Hive for anything personal. I kept every interaction with Daniel strictly transactional. "Hi, project update, thanks, bye." We went from 45-minute evening conversations to single-line acknowledgments during working hours. The shift was so abrupt that I think it was, in its own way, suspicious. And then the HR meeting happened.
No tomé. To Daniel.
He went in for his scheduled follow-up. 50 minutes. I sat at my desk and watched the clock move through each of those 50 minutes like I was waiting for a verdict. He came out looking calm. That composed but stressed expression again, but controlled. Later that day, not on Hive, on a personal SMS, he sent me one message, "Went fine." They focused on another team member's feedback. "You weren't mentioned." And I felt so many things at once reading that message that I had to go stand in the stairwell for 5 minutes just to sort through them. Relief, obviously, but also fury. Because do you know what "you weren't mentioned" means? It means I had been a concern. It means that at some point, in some HR office, my name had been adjacent to a conversation about my boss's interpersonal conduct. It means that the promotion, however real the role was, had done exactly what Daniel intended. It had made me look like a protected career choice rather than a personal liability. He had managed the situation, and I had let him because I hadn't seen any other option. That's the part that kept me up at night. Not the discovery that I had, effectively, participated in a cover-up, but the discovery that I had done so without ever agreeing to it. I had been maneuvered into it, given a choice that wasn't really a choice, offered a gift that came with a price tag printed in invisible ink. Over the following 2 months, I watched Daniel from a careful distance. He was good at his job, I'll give him that. He managed the HR aftermath smoothly. He adjusted his communication style with the rest of the team, more structured one-on-ones, more visible documentation of decisions. He performed being a better manager, and we just existed in proximity to each other, professionally polite, occasionally in the same room, never alone. The messages had stopped entirely, and that silence was its own strange grief, because whatever the thing had been between us, inappropriate, complicated, inadvisable, it had also been real. He had known things about me that my closest friends didn't. I had known about his marriage, his doubts, the newsletter that he was probably never going to finish. That intimacy doesn't just evaporate because you stop sending messages. It sits in the room with you, invisible, during every company all hands. That's the other thing nobody talks about with workplace affairs. The ending isn't a clean break. You still have to see the person. You still have to be professional and competent in their presence. You still have to CC them on emails like nothing happened. It is a special kind of psychological endurance sport. 4 months after the promotion, Daniel announced that he was leaving the company. I found out the same way everyone else did, an all-staff email from the CEO. After much reflection, Daniel has decided to pursue a new opportunity. We wish him all the best. I read it at my desk at 8:47 in the morning, and I had to very deliberately keep my face neutral while everyone around me gasped and chattered. He had told no one, including me. I'm going to be honest, my first feeling was abandonment, which is uncomfortable to admit because I knew, intellectually, that the right thing for both of us, for the workplace, for every person caught in the orbit of our ridiculous situation, was for it to be over. I knew that. I had known that for months. But knowing something is right doesn't stop you from feeling left behind when it happens.
E emailed me. Personal address, not Word.
3 paragraphs. He said that he owed me an honest conversation before he left. He said said he recognized that he had handled things badly, that the promotion, whatever the professional merit of it, had been motivated in part by self-protection, and that putting me in that position had been wrong. He said he was sorry. 3 paragraphs. 4 months of emotional complication, and 3 paragraphs. I didn't reply for 2 weeks. When I did reply, I wrote something much longer than 3 paragraphs. I wrote about how it had felt to receive that promotion and not be able to celebrate it cleanly. I wrote about what it was like to sit in HR-adjacent paranoia for months, knowing that my career advancement had been partly engineered to protect someone else's reputation. I wrote about the specific, demoralizing experience of being given something you deserve and feeling like you couldn't own it. I was not cruel. I was honest. There's a difference. He responded with something that surprised me. He said that reading my email was the most accurate accounting of his behavior he'd ever received, and that he had no defense for most of it, which did not fix anything. But it mattered in a small way, that he didn't try to rewrite the story. So here is what I actually took from all of this. First, an emotional affair is still an affair. I spent a long time telling myself that because nothing physical had happened, it didn't fully count, that I hadn't really crossed any lines. And I think that was a way of protecting myself from the weight of what had been going on. The reality is that the intimacy we had built through messages, through late-night conversations, through all the small accumulations of being genuinely known by someone, that is real. It affects people. It affected me. It probably affected his marriage. The absence of a physical component doesn't make emotional infidelity clean. Second, power imbalances in workplace relationships don't disappear because the feeling seems mutual. Daniel and I both felt something genuine. I believe that. But he was my manager. He had power over my performance reviews, my project allocations, my professional development. Even if he never weaponized that power against me directly, the imbalance shaped everything.
The promotion proved that.
Even the kindness of the promotion, the genuine part of it, the recognition of my talent, was entangled with his own interests. You cannot fully separate those things when the dynamic is unequal. You cannot.
You don't care how good the intentions are.
Third, institutions protect themselves, and you should expect that. The HR process wasn't there to protect me. It wasn't there to protect Daniel, really. It was there to protect the company from liability. I was never a person in that process. I was a variable. And understanding that earlier, understanding that no organization, however well-intentioned, will navigate your personal reality for you, would have helped me make different decisions. Fourth, and this is the one that took me the longest, I deserved the promotion. Not because of the affair. Not despite the affair. I deserved it because I was good at my job, and I had to fight internally for the right to believe that. Because every time I thought about my new title or my new salary, the origin story would show up and muddy it, and I had to learn, slowly, imperfectly, to separate what I had earned from what I had been offered, and to know that even when those things came wrapped in the same package, they were still distinct things. I worked hard. I was talented. I was also put in an unfair position by someone who should have known better. Both are true. They can both be true. I still work at that company, by the way, not in the promoted role. I moved into a different position about 8 months later, when I applied for myself through the standard process with a panel interview and everything. I have, at this point, exactly 0 complicated feelings about that title. It's better. Everything is cleaner when you earn the things simply. Daniel is, as far as I know, doing fine at his new company. I don't follow him on LinkedIn. I made that decision deliberately, and I feel good about it. The colleague with the balloon, the one who put it on my monitor the day of the promotion announcement, she became one of my closest friends at work. She never knew the full story.
Maybe one day you'll tell her.
Or maybe she'll watch this video and figure it out herself. Hi, Sophie. Here's the thing about secrets in a workplace. They always cost something. Sometimes they cost you your reputation. Sometimes your job.
Sometimes use your sleep.
What it cost me was about 18 months of carrying something heavy in a room full of people who had no idea I was carrying it. That's not a tragedy. It's just the price of a particular kind of bad decision, made partly by me, made partly by someone who had more power than he used well.
I'm not angry anymore.
I'm past it in most of the ways that matter. But I did want to say it out loud.
The whole thing.
Start to finish. Because secrets that live only in your head have a way of becoming larger than they deserve to be. And this one, out loud, turns out to be just a story. A fairly ridiculous one, honestly.
A corporate messaging platform.
A promotion. And the particular, spectacular foolishness of 2 people who should have known better. Here's to knowing better. Eventually. If this story resonated with you, for whatever reason, drop a comment below. And if you've ever had something at work you couldn't talk about openly. I see you.
Itzaguirtin tokeri.
You'll put it down eventually. The opposite of a secret isn't exposure. It's honesty. They're different, and the timing matters.